Hello and welcome to this video, and on this video I'm going to be ranking the studio albums by the jazz fusion group Return to Forever, which was formed by Chick Corea in 1972. Before I get into my ranking, I'm going to go into a little of the background behind this band, because when we're talking about Return to Forever, we're sort of talking about, in a way, 2.5 bands, not one band, and each of those is completely different to the other. Chick Corea is a jazz pianist who was born in 1941. He emerged in the 1960s. He was incredibly virtuoso on his instrument, and he was pulling in a lot of very modernist avant-garde influences into his playing. There's a strong, obvious jazz standard way of playing, standard way of playing jazz with Chick Corea, but there's also free jazz in there, modern classical music, Spanish influences and Latin influences. And he emerges in the 60s in a standard acoustic piano trio format, really showcasing a virtuoso style which is comparable to a pianist like Keith Jarrett. He inevitably gets the gig with Miles Davis, where he gets to play electric instruments for the first time. And the Chick Corea lineup in the Miles Davis band is probably the most free version of Miles's band. So the point is that Chick Corea is making incredibly esoteric, difficult avant-garde music at this point. He starts on a solo career, and he forms an avant-garde free jazz band called Circle. He signs with ECM Records, and he's making challenging records at this point. In the early 70s, he becomes a Scientologist, and this drastically affects his output. Once he becomes a Scientologist, there's a change, and he now wants to make music that's more accessible. And so he makes a solo album on ECM Records in 1972 called Return to Forever. On this album, he's playing an electric piano. There's vocals on there, songs, and it is exploring an area between sort of light acoustic electric jazz and Latin American music with a Spanish tinge. The first album is actually not a Return to Forever album, it's just the title of the album by Chick Corea. But this is where our journey starts, is with that ECM album. That album obviously is far more successful than the avant-garde stuff he's doing with Circle and on albums like Piano Improvisations. So he does more, and he moves to Polydor Records and makes the second Return to Forever album, which this is now called Return to Forever featuring Chick Corea, and he makes Light as a Feather, another Latin jazz album. The lineup of this band would be Chick Corea on electric piano, Stanley Clarke, very young Stanley Clarke, who's about 20 years old when he joins Return to Forever, on electric and acoustic bass. On the first album, Return to Forever, he plays electric and acoustic. On the second, Light as a Feather, it's all acoustic bass. The great Joe Farrell on saxophone, and then Airtu and Flora Purim, Airtu on percussion and drums, Flora Purim on vocals. The second album, Light as a Feather, pursues the same ideas. Both of these albums, contain tunes that have gone on to become jazz standards. And Chick Corea's most famous tune, which is possibly Spain, is on Light as a Feather. Then Chick Corea hears the Mahavishnu Orchestra. And when asked about the influence of Miles Davis on fusion in an interview, Chick Corea once turned around and said, yeah, Miles did his thing, but the great innovation, the guy that turned music on its head, that's to quote him or paraphrase him, is John McLaughlin in the Mahavishnu Orchestra. And he decides to form a similar high-powered electric band. Chick Corea, being a musical genius, he doesn't copy the musical aspects of the Mahavishnu Orchestra. He's able to forge his own grand statement in jazz rock with the second incarnation of the Mahavishnu Orchestra. This is retained Stanley Clarke on bass, but now we have Lenny White on drums and Bill Connors on electric guitar, and they make an album called Hymn to the Seventh Galaxy. Bill Connors then leaves to pursue a very strange solo career that I might talk about when we get to that point. And a very young Aldi Meola comes in, a guitar virtuoso, and they make 3 more albums with this, which is now considered the classic Return to Forever lineup, which would be Where Have I Known You Before, No Mystery, and Romantic Warrior. Romantic Warrior is on a new label, it's on CBS. Apparently Chick Corea signed a multi-million-pound deal to move to CBS with Return to Forever, and at that point he disbands the band, retaining Stanley Clarke for a final Return to Forever album called Music Magic, which is basically Chick and Stanley with with his now wife Gail Moran for the Mahavishnu Orchestra on vocals and piano, and augmented by a brass section. Oh yes, and with the great Jerry Brown on drums. And this again is like, I'm not going to call this a full band because they only made 1 album, but this is a change in direction. And then that's it. Return to Forever have got back together since then many times. They've made a number of live albums. They do come back in 1982 on this album here, Touchstone. There's one track called Compadres, which is 10 minutes long, which is the sort of last studio outing of Return to Forever. So that there is an overview of the recorded studio output of Return Forever, for those of you who want to get an idea of how this all works and all fits together. So I am now going to rank them. There's how many albums have we got? I'll just look at my notes. So we've basically got 7 albums there to rank, and I'm going to go from worst to best. Okay, now at number 7, and I didn't want to put this album at number 7 because I think it is underrated as an album. And I think there's reasons for that, and we're going to get into that now. But I've gone back and listened to it, and I'm afraid compared to the other albums on this list, this album is the worst Return to Forever album. And it is the last one, Music Magic, which I think came out in 1977. Okay? So let's get into a little bit more detail. This album, right, it's difficult starting with this first because this is absolutely unlike Return to Forever. We've got Chick Corea on acoustic piano, Fender Rhodes, clavinet, and he's on ARP, Odyssey, and Mini Moog. You know, so he's got that big keyboard setup that we associate with Return to Forever. We've got Gail Moran on acoustic piano, Hammond organ, and she's also singing. We've got Stanley Clarke retained on electric bass, acoustic bass, and he's singing too. We've got the great Jerry Brown on drums. Now, Jerry Brown is a very underrated fusion drummer, and his playing is absolutely incredible. He's tight and snappy and funky, and these incredible rolls around really muted toms. I absolutely love Jerry Brown, and his drumming on this is absolutely fantastic, as always. We've got the return of the great Joe Farrell on piccolo, flute, soprano saxophone, tenor saxophone, and then it's augmented by a brass section. James Tinsley on piccolo, trumpet and trumpet, John Thomas on trumpet and flugelhorn, James E. Pugh on tenor trombone, and Howell Garrett on tenor trombone. So it's almost like Return to Forever has gone to a new incarnation, which is basically Chick Corea, Stanley Clarke and Jerry Brown, and the guitar has been replaced by a brass section. What we have on this album is quite long form compositions that take a sort of Chick's Spanish, Latin take on sort of modern classical through composed composition. That's what we have on this album. The tunes are pretty weighty. We open up with The Musician, which is 7 minutes, and then we've got a song called Hello Again, which is 3 minutes 49, written by Stanley Clarke. And then we have a tune called Music Magic, which is 11 minutes and provides the centerpiece of the album. A track called So Long Mickey Mouse, which is 6 minutes. Do You Ever, 3 minutes. These are sort of little songs again. And then at the end we've got Endless Night, which is another 10-minute great big composition. Now, why am I telling you the structure of this? And it's because this album, when it's good, is incredible, right? Chick's compositions, they do meander a little bit. Sometimes they take a little bit to get going, but if you're expecting to Return Forever, you're going to be disappointed. But if you want to sit back and just hear almost like a classical approach to composition on this album. It's very interesting. When they do start soloing on this, they burn, and it's some of the best Return to Forever soloing on record on here. So the musical bits are absolutely fantastic. This album is completely undone by the vocals, which are absolutely wretched. I can take vocals on a jazz fusion album. I will do a video at some point where I explore vocals in jazz fusion, you know, and really have a look at the many examples where jazz fusion musicians have tried to get some sort of commercial appeal by singing, and it's always the most funny when they try and sing themselves, you know. Some of them pull it off, you know, some don't. There's a whole study in this. Music Magic is probably the best example of an album being ruined by bad jazz fusion vocals. And the reason why they're bad is because the vocals are incongruous, you know, and often the vocal stylings is pulling from the most Muzak-y, middle of the road. You know, they're not trying to be Robert Plant, or they're not trying to be Ozzy Osbourne. You know, it always goes a little bit like the Carpenters, and I like the Carpenters, but a jazz fusion musician trying to be like the Carpenters just never works. The lyrics, these aren't lyric writers, they can't write lyrics, they're not Joni Mitchell's, and the lyrics are always absolutely awful. You get this schlocky rubbish, you know, and this album is really undone by this, and it's what for me drops it down. I normally can listen past stuff, you know, if there's a couple of albums, if there's an album with a couple of bad tracks off and then they go in and burn, I can go, I still love this album, I can ignore that. But with this, it is truly awful. I think Gail Moran's vocals, I love them in the Mahavishnu Orchestra. You know, when she sings in the Mahavishnu Orchestra, it seems to work, and I think that's because of John McLaughlin's spiritual vision, and that choir is almost like celebratory. And of course here we have Chick Corea's Scientologist vision, and it all seems very weird to me, very weird. Right, so I've lost my place. I put myself off, you see. It's those vocals now, I'm thinking about them, they're doing my head in. Let's take a track on here like So Long Mickey Mouse. I mean, what does that mean? And it starts off with some of the most awful vocals, and then morphs in some of the most incredible music that Return to Forever has ever recorded, you know. So the thing is, with this album, when I say it's some of the most incredible music that Return to Forever has recorded, but it's not Return to Forever. So I think what we got with this album is Chick Corea moves to a major label. He does one album with the classic Return to Forever album, and then he disbands it, and I think he had an idea in mind, and I think he thought that this sort of big augmented sort of orchestral version of fusion with heavy vocals was going to be a huge success. And I think he used the Return to Forever name, you know, in which to embed that success, and it simply didn't work. He does carry on in the same vein with his solo albums, but the vocals are wound in. There's plenty of Gail Moran vocals on the album Leprechaun, but that's one of my favourite fusion albums. And the reason for that is because the tweeness of the vocals fits in with the bizarre tweeness of the concept of that album, which is a sort of jazz fusion album about fairy folk. What the am I talking about? Sometimes it makes you think that, you know, incredible musicians should probably just stick at making incredible music. So that's what we got at number 7 anyway, is Music Magic by the last incarnation of Return to Forever. So at number 6, right, from then on, all these albums are absolutely fantastic, okay? At number 6, I have No Mystery, which, if you remember, is the second album by the Al Di Meola classic Return to Forever lineup, right? This is a good album, but I've always found it problematic, and I had no problem putting it here. I really wanted to be a bit contentious and put Music Magic over No Mystery, because for me, No Mystery is undone by side 1. Side 2 is fantastic. Side 1 contains a whole bunch of compositions by the other guys, by Stanley, Al, and Lenny White. And they're really trying to pursue the area that had been opened up by headhunters and all the funky jazz fusion, right? And it's undone for that. Return to Forever, the classic fusion Return to Forever. This version of Return, God, this is hard to get through, isn't it? See, there's too many Return to Forevers. Right, this version is bombastic. That's the whole thing that makes Return to Forever great, is they are bombastic. If you look up bombast in the dictionary, it will have a picture of Return to Forever, right? So when they go funky, we get this sort of bombastic version of funk. And it's a little bit like another band that is famous for bombast, which I think influenced Return to Forever a little bit, which is ELP. And in no way can ELP go funky, because bombast and funk does not go together. And I really, as a kid, when I got this album, I really didn't like side one, and I was really let down that Return to Forever would do that. Side 2 opens up with the track No Mystery, which is acoustic Chick Corea competition. It's absolutely beautiful. Whether it's like Return to Forever, I'm not so sure, but it is an absolutely fantastic composition. And then right at the end, right, I think there's another track on here, and I'm just going to pull out what that's called. Yeah, there's a little improvisation between Chick Corea and Stanley Clarke called Interplay, and that's really setting up the big epic. The last 2 tracks of the album, which is called Celebration Suite Part 1 and Part 2. And I'm just looking at my notes so I can tell you how long that is. That's 8 minutes and 5 minutes. And then another minute on top of that. So what's that? 8 add 5. So that's that's 15 minutes. 16 minutes. 16 minutes, right? So Celebration Suite is fantastic. It's very Spanishy, right? It's incredible soloing on there. Al Di Meola does an absolutely incredible guitar solo. It's just absolutely, this is where it's brilliant. Celebration Suite is absolutely brilliant. But it's not entirely the classic Return to Forever sound, but it's pretty close. Very Spanishy. This track, for me, makes this album great. And you have to have it for that track. The tracks on side 1, there's some okay stuff, a lot of short tracks, they never seem to get going. Sophistifunk is not great. Lenny White can write funky tunes, but he needs a different band. So, a middling album for me, with Celebration Suite is absolutely fantastic. Like I say, when you listen to side 2, it's great. But how much actual Return to Forever is on here is questionable. Now, why did I put it above Music Magic? What happens was I was listening to one of the incredible solos on Music Magic, and I thought, God, this is really incredible. Maybe I should rate that higher than No Mystery. And I just clicked onto No Mystery, and I stuck one of these funky tracks on, just stuck it on, and I could hear the signature sound of Return to Forever. I could hear that sort of, very strident bass and all the unison stuff going on. And as soon as I heard that sound, and it's chunky and meaty, it's heavy, even when they're doing awful funk, it's heavy. And that's the sound of Return to Forever. Music Magic hasn't got that. And to be honest, nothing else in Chick Corea's catalogue has got that. That meaty heavy metal bombast is only present on 4 albums, okay? And that is the sound of Return to Forever. And that sound is on No Mystery. So if you want that sound and you want all of it, you're going to have to get No Mystery. So that's what I've got at number 6 on my list. Right, now, at number 5, I have an absolute classic album, which is one of the great jazz albums of all time. So from 5 to 1, we're talking masterpieces. And at number 5, I have put Return to Forever, the first album from 1972 on ECM Records. The one that's not really Return to Forever, is just named Return to Forever. You remember that one? Chick Corea goes down in history with Return to Forever for pioneering 2 completely different sounds. The bombastic fusion sound of the Al Di Meola Bill Connors Return to Forever, and the light Latin jazz sound of the original acoustic-y Return to Forever. Acoustic-y. So, we have 2 albums here. I love these albums, but I don't love them as much as the classic Return to Forever albums. We know what this channel's about, don't we? This channel is about jazz fusion, and Return to Forever are one of the seminal jazz fusion bands, right? So those albums are going to rank very high in my world, okay? So this is not knocking these 2 Latin jazz albums here, which I have at 5 and 4. I've let the cat out of the bag, you know. Now, I nearly placed them both at 4. It was really hard to decide which one I was going to rank above the other. I ranked Return to Forever at 5. I've ranked Light as a Feather at 4, and this is my argument for doing that. In terms of the first album, it really benefits from ECM's production. So I actually think the production on Return to Forever is slightly better than Light as a Feather. They both sound great, but I actually find the production on Return to Forever is absolutely magical. And on La Fiesta, you know, when that walking bass line comes in, it's so crystal clear. There's very few jazz albums that have ever sounded like that. But both of these albums contain jazz standards. This album contains, Return to Forever contains Crystal Silence and La Fiesta, and Light as a Feather contains Spain and 500 Miles High, you know. So they've both got jazz standards on there. So this is what we're dealing with. I feel that Return to Forever, fantastic album as it is, meanders slightly. It's a little bit ECM-y. It's a little bit spatial and ambient and exploring space. And whereas Light as a Feather is a lot more concise, and it's slightly heavier. It's a little bit more driving. And I think the formula that Chick Corea has come up with, he's consolidated on Light as a Feather. It's really hard to differentiate between these 2 albums. They're both classic albums for me. It's really interesting. Stanley plays electric bass on the first album. I've never felt that works quite as well as his driving acoustic bass on Light as a Feather, right? So I've been able there to jump across 2 albums there. So yeah, number 5 I have Return to Forever, and at number 4 I have Light as a Feather. So now we're left with 3 albums from the classic fusion Return to Forever, you know. And how am I going to place these? They're both absolutely fantastic. All 3 are absolutely fantastic. So at number 3 I have the second album by the fusion version of Return to Forever, and that is Where Have I Known You Before. This is a classic fusion album. It's brutal, it's in your face. On the second album by the fusion lineup, Chick Corea augments his electric piano with synthesizers, and we see the introduction of a very young Al Di Meola on guitar. This album is a fantastic album. For me, it's been put in 3rd place for 2 reasons. But before we get onto that, I'm actually going to go through the tracks on it, because I don't want to run. I know I don't want to sound like I'm running this album down. I'm just basically trying to explain why it's made 3rd place. Vulcan Worlds opens up, absolutely fantastic. It's very simple, similar to the track that opens up Stanley Clarke's solo album. And I think that's called Vulcan Princess, and those 2 tracks are related to me. If you're a Return to Forever fan, you need to check out Stanley Clarke's second solo album as well. I prefer Vulcan Princess, always have done, but Vulcan Worlds is fantastic, you know, classic Return to Forever. Then we get Where Have I Loved You Before. All the way through this album, the big fusion tracks are punctuated by some beautiful, short little piano solos that almost relate back to piano improvisations by Chick Corea. And that lifts this album up. This is a real positive point. Then we got the incredible Shadows of Low. Lenny White's a strong composer. Anyone who's listened to Lenny White's solo albums will know this. Sophistifunk aside, you know, and Shadows of Low is an absolute classic fusion album. This is a great track on here. Then we have Where Have I Danced With You Before, another short piano piece, beautiful. And then we have Beyond the Seventh Galaxy, which seems to point to the album before, and is perhaps my favourite track on this album because it sounds like the album before. Number 6, we have Earth Juice. Again, this is written by the whole band, and it's one of those funky tracks. It foreshadows the whole of side 1 on No Mystery, and I've never liked Earth Juice, and it just goes on. It is interesting, however, this album's made in 1974, is it? Lenny White's playing a full-on disco beat in 1974, so that's pretty early on. I should have done the research. It's well worth looking at where the disco beat originated and who was the first guy to play it. I was actually watching a video on YouTube about this and I can't remember. But it'd be interesting to check out what year that is, because either Lenny's beat that drummer to it or he has picked up on that beat very early on, because it's a full-on open hi-hat disco beat. But in terms of the tune, I've never liked that. Then we get Where Have I Known You Before, which is another short piano interlude, which then sets up for the incredible Song to the Pharaoh Kings, which is one of Return to Forever's finest moments. And this is really, for me, where you, for the first time, see Chick Corea integrating the synthesizers into that sound. It's absolutely mind-blowing, right? So, pretty good album, right? So why have I rated it below the others? For me, it's all to do with the production. You know, if they could get hold of the original master tracks of this and do a remix, we would have one of the greatest fusion albums that's ever made. But all the albums on Polydor Records are muddy and tinny, and the drums seem thin, and it's very upper mid, and it's jarring. I grew up with the 1980s CD copy. I'm sure it's been remastered since then. I haven't heard that, so tell me all about whether it sounds a lot better now. I've listened to it online and it doesn't sound that much better to me. So this album's let down by the production, right? But this is one of the most classic fusion albums in fusion history. We got it at number 3. I mean, I've ranked it above Light as a Feather and Return to Forever. You know, so you know, I am not knocking this. Right, so at number 2, we have an absolute favourite album of mine, which is Hymn to the Seventh Galaxy, the first of the fusion lineups, and unique in that instead of having Al Di Meola, it's got Bill Connors on guitar. Bill Connors is a really odd one in the history of jazz fusion, a really strange character. For all us fusion fans, we know that his guitar playing on this album and on the Stanley Clarke solo album, self-titled, is some of the finest jazz fusion guitar playing. In a modern age where every jazz fusion guitarist sounds slick and they've got every lick down and all that type of thing, Bill Connors represents that early era of jazz fusion where guitarists were channeling Coltrane and Hendrix at the same time, and they were playing with wild abandon. Of course, John McLaughlin is the guy that comes in with that sound. Larry Coriol's there. Those early fusion guitarists sound out of control. They rip your face off. They are burning, and that's what we have. Al Di Meola's a lot more control, but on this first album, you have the absolutely berserk, out of control guitar playing of Bill Connors. His tone is absolutely thick and beautiful, and he really makes this album absolute classic. It's the heaviest of the Return to Forever albums. Bill Connors makes a difference. Now, we need to chat about this album, because originally, when Chick made the change from the sort of Latin band to the fusion band, he brought in Steve Gadd on drums. Now, Steve Gadd, for me, one of the greatest drummers that's ever lived, but he's a lot calmer and cooler. Steve Gadd couldn't commit to the touring, and so Chick decided to re-record the album with Lenny White on drums. I've spent many years trying to track down a recording of the Steve Gadd version of this album. I would love to hear it, and I've never been able to find it. You know, doing the research on the internet, they say that it is lost. I don't know if that's the case, or in more recent times, you know, they have been able to track down. I don't know if it appears on one of these big box sets. I haven't got those, so you know, if I would love to hear that, but I've looked and tried to find it on the internet, can't find it. But I think it's a masterstroke bringing Lenny White in. Lenny White is a contemporary of Billy Cobham, and he's channeling the same sort of ideas of Billy Cobham. I think the fact that he emerges, even though he's playing on Bitches Brew, he emerges in the public consciousness on this album, and I think he got a lot of flack for being sort of in the shadow of Cobham, but I know that's not the case. And what Lenny White's doing on this album is completely different to what Cobham does, but it's got that bombast that Cobham's got. So the inclusion of Lenny White over Steve Gadd is key to the sound. Stanley Clarke moves for electric bass, and he brings that muscular sort of, you know, speedy approach to a double bass, and he puts that onto electric bass. Every player on this is meaty, and this is a heavy in-your-face album. The bad production that I often associate with these albums, it seems to work in this case. This isn't a well-recorded album, you know, but it's a heavy metal album, and it burns, and it almost sounds on fire. Let's just go through the track list. They're all incredible. Hymn to the Seventh Galaxy, that opener, which almost acts as an overture and just goes, here we are, this is our version of jazz fusion, heavily influenced by progressive rock, a ton of Yes, a ton of ELP, mix it with the Hendrixy rock of the Mavish Orchestra, and here we have it, underlaid with Chick Corea's incredible virtuoso compositional style, which is pulling from classical music. That's what we've got there. Then we have After the Cosmic Rain, Stanley Clarke composition, and it just burns. And from now on, they just take your face off for 8 minutes straight, followed by Captain Sin Your Mouse, which again takes your face off for 9 minutes straight. It's well worth checking out the version of Captain Sin Your Mouse on Crystal Silence by Gary Burton and Chick Corea, because I got that album first as a kid. So I was used to this delicate acoustic version of Captain Sin Your Mouse, right? This is the strength of Chick Corea's compositions, and how he can do this, I don't know. So we have this beautiful vibraphone and piano version, and then I put on this version here. And actually, the very first track I ever heard off this album was Captain Sin Your Mouse on a Chick Corea compilation. And when that riff kicks in, absolutely incredible. Turn it over, theme to the mothership. This is where they actually just take it and go up another notch, right? Space Circus winds it down, and Space Circus is actually quite funky, and is a cool little track. I think this version could have been a lot funkier than the Al Di Meola version. Al Di Meola's just not funky, is he? He's funky on side 2 of his debut album, on the Golden Dawn suite, with Jacko, and he does that. It's funky guitar, but it's Al Di Meola funk, so he could be funky. I should not knock out, but I don't find Return to Forever funky. But Space Circus, they get there, and then right at the end they hit you right in the face for 6 minutes straight with The Game Maker. This is brutal jazz rock. This is what we love on this channel, brutal jazz rock, right? And this album is right up here. So what have I got at number 1? Of course, it's the last album by the classic lineup. It's Romantic Warrior. You know, they've moved to CBS. They've got better production. Right, I'm just going to check here, because I was about to say they got Ken Scott, the great Ken Scott that had produced all those Mavish Orchestra albums. But there's a little bit of in the back of my mind going, that is not the case. So I'm just having a look. Technical personnel. It's not Ken Scott. It's Dennis Mackay. That's who we've got as the recording engineer, right, on this album. And Dennis Mackay really brings out the sound of Return Forever. This is one of the most beautifully recorded fusion albums in history. And by this point, it's as though everything that Return to Forever is about, they understand and they know how to do it. They know what each person brings in. The balance between compositions by Chick and compositions by the other musicians is absolutely perfect. And every composition brought in by the other guys fits into the overall concept of this album. And the concept of this album is they're really exploring this idea of medieval progressive rock imagery. You know, this is also one of the great progressive rock albums of all time. I've always said this is the greatest instrumental progressive rock album ever made. Right? Again, it starts off with an overture, medieval overture written by Chick Corea, 5 minutes long, kicks in, does all the stuff you want, and that incredible frenetic Lenny White. And for the first time, you've actually heard Lenny White recorded properly, and you can hear the detail of all the snare drum and these incredibly fast bass drum work, absolutely unbelievable. And then we get The Sorceress by Lenny White. And this is, again, Lenny White brings a funk to the band, and here this works. And I think it's because it's darker and spacey. I think that is when Return to Forever work. It's funky, but it's more soulful. It contains an absolutely incredible acoustic piano solo by Chick Corea, one of his finest moments. And if you want to understand that brittle piano approach that Chick Corea's got, that super accurate, brittle, incredibly well phrased and in control, check out his piano solo on there, Sorceress. And then side one wraps up with The Romantic Warrior, which is a 10-minute acoustic track. Everyone's playing acoustic. It relates to No Mystery, you know, that type of approach. No Mystery is fantastic. This is even greater. It's absolutely beautiful, brilliant. Turn it over and we have Al Di Meola's Majestic Dance. And by this point, Al Di Meola is embarking on a solo career, and he has taken that sort of Latin Spanish fusion of Chick Corea and made it even heavier, and he's gone almost towards a heavy metal version of that. And I think Al Di Meola's writing is strong here, and what he brings in on Majestic Dance is incredible, and some of the unison lines he plays on guitar is absolutely virtuoso. Then we have The Magician by Stanley Clarke. Now, we all know Stanley Clarke with those big fat slap bass lines, and you know he's very funky on his own albums. But The Magician is a really strange, through composed tune, which is made brilliant by its sort of compositional approach. I know Stanley Clarke has an interest in progressive rock. He's got an interest in Yes. You hear it on this, and it paints the picture of a magician. And then we finish up with one of the great moments by Return to Forever, The Jewel of the Jester of the Tyrant. Absolutely burning fusion, some incredible soloing from Chick Corea and Al Di Meola and the whole band, and interspersions of almost like comedy music, which obviously represents the Jester. And it shows that Return to Forever, serious about the music, but not afraid to have a little smile and have some fun, you know. And it's great to hear them finish up with this track, but they don't quite finish on here. This album, Chick Corea Touchstones, in 1982 they reformed and went back into the studio for one more time on a tune called Compadres. This is a 10-minute tune, so we cannot go and overlook it. Chick Corea, Fender Rhodes, Yamaha GS1, OBX-A and Mini Moog, Al Di Meola guitar, Stanley Clarke bass, Lenny White drums. Here we have it there, just so you can see. And that's the one there, Compadres. This is absolutely fantastic. It's as good as and probably better than most of the stuff on No Mystery. It's definitely better than anything on Music Magic. So that has to be mentioned as well. Compadres. And so that there is my overview of the studio albums of Return to Forever. And I hope that's given you a good idea. And I hope if you've never listened to Return to Forever and you want to know which albums to buy, you will now, if you want to hear the fusion version, you won't go and buy the first Return to Forever album, or Light as a Feather. And if you really want to know, if you only wanted to have 2 albums by Return to Forever, it's definitely going to be the first and the last of the fusion lineup. Hymn to the Seventh Galaxy and Romantic Warrior. They are the 2 essential albums that I put into my list of essential jazz fusion albums that every jazz fusion fan must own. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you like this video, please like the video. If you want to hear more videos like this, then please subscribe. Ring the notification bell so you can see what else I'm up to. There's a whole ton of stuff about jazz fusion on here, and there's a whole ton of videos about Chick Corea and Return to Forever here. I think I did a 3-part series on Return to Forever, but I didn't get to rank the albums, so I've now ranked the albums. If you like what I'm doing and you want to go deeper, more esoteric, more philosophical, and just get right in there, then please become a Patreon and support me doing this. The more patrons I get, the more I can do this, and you know, the more I can support myself, get better equipment and all that sort of stuff. At the moment I'm just talking to you on the audio. I'm sure you can hear all sorts of little noises. Everyone's complaining about it. Well, become a patron. I can buy myself a mic then, you know. So I'm not Rick Beato, you know. I've not got access to those funds. I'm a very lowly small YouTuber, you know. And that's because I get to talk about jazz, rock, fusion and prog. You know, if I was doing videos on Bon Jovi and Michael Jackson, it would be a different thing, wouldn't it? But I'm not. I'm here serving you, talking about all this music you like, that you haven't got anyone else to talk to about it, because hardly anybody else likes this music, do they? And that's bad. We need to keep it alive. We need to keep this alive so people will hear it for the future. That's what I'm trying to do here. So if you want to support me doing that, and I promise you there's a whole ton of content on my Patreon. I'm really trying to sell it. I'm here crassly using this platform to make money by getting you to sign up to Patreon down below. Go and have a look, see what you think. You know, oh God, I'm trying to sell myself. I have no shame, you know. I've got no shame. Anyway, I think I'm at the end of the video. I'm going to go now. Return to Forever, one of the great fusion bands of all time. Chick Corea, absolute virtuoso musician, much missed. Keep listening to them, absolutely incredible. And I'll see you on the next video. Thanks for watching.